Welcome back to Texas in Focus. My guest on the program today is Gina Ortiz Jones. She is a former congressional candidate, former Undersecretary of the Air Force, and most importantly for this conversation, one of the leading candidates for mayor of San Antonio. Gina, thank you so much for joining the program today.
Thanks, Matt.
Absolutely. So let's start with the basic question. Tell us why you want to be the next mayor of San Antonio.
I want to make sure my community is well led. I am a proud product of our community, and my life story, I think, has shown what is possible when you've got strong investments in young people, right? I grew up on the far west side of San Antonio, went to John Jay High School, but I think it's always really important for me to share. I'm a proud first generation American, right? My mom came to this country over 40 years ago. She graduated from the #1 university in the Philippines, but she came here as a domestic helper. That was the chance at the American dream, and she wanted it because she knew if she was willing to work hard in that even if she came here in that capacity, the sky's the limit, right? And she just reminded my sister and I every single day that we were lucky, not smart. We were lucky to have been born in this very special country. We would have to give back. So it's why I served in the Air Force. It's why my sister serves in the Navy to this day. It was an Air Force ROTC scholarship, right? That took me from John Jay High School to Boston University. Actually, before that, though, reduced lunch, subsidized housing, those were critical investments, not handouts. They were investments that allowed me to grow up healthy, get an education. And that Air Force ROTC scholarship took me to Boston University. And I was honored to receive that, to earn that. But I'll never forget, one of the first things I had to do there, even before my first day of class, was very formative for me. I had to sign a piece of paper, Matt, that said I would not engage in homosexual behavior because don't ask, don't tell was the policy at the time, right? And I knew what that meant for me. My opportunity to get an education, my opportunity to serve our country, my opportunity to die for our country if need be, all that goes away just because at the time we didn't have enough leaders with the courage to say anybody ready or willing to serve their country should have the opportunity to do so, right? And so I think that for me, fast forward then 20 years when I was honored to serve as the Undersecretary of the Air Force, so the #2 over the Air Force and Space Force. You're damn right. I challenged myself to be the leader that I wish I would have had as that young person, as that young officer, to make sure that we were really tapping into the full talent in our community. For me, that experience also always showed the importance of making sure that when you're making decisions, try to hear from as many folks as possible about who could because this is going to impact many more folks than maybe you even understand, right? So whenever I'm leading and I'm having a discussion, I want to know, who am I not hearing from, right? Why, most importantly, why am I not hearing from them? Again, having had my own experience with that. And then I think in our city, where so many communities have been left behind, they feel left behind because they have been left behind. You can see it in the lack of investment in their community. I think that perspective is going to be really important. So yes, the management experience, having led 600,000 people, managed $173 billion budget. But again, also the leadership, the humility to understand, okay, we need to think about the generational opportunities that we have in our community, right? In the context of our generational inequities. And I look forward to doing that. I also think, we have to have a plan. Even if we had a different governor, even if we had a different president, we'd still have the fact, Matt, over half the kids in our community are not reading at level. Their math skills are not at level. 95,000 families are housing insecure every month, right? Struggling to pay the rent, struggling to pay the mortgage. 67,000 folks are on a wait list for affordable housing. And yes, construction all over our community is making it very hard for small businesses to frankly stay open, but also making it just hard for people to get to and from work, right? Get to what they need to do. And so, these challenges are not going to solve themselves. I have on my website identified the things that I want to work on in the first 100 days, right? These are things that we know are challenges and opportunities in our community. We've got the talent, we've got the resources. Now I look forward to bringing the leadership so we can really tackle these things.
And to get in there and make that change in the first 100 days, first you've got to win. And a recent poll shows you're actually the leading candidate with about 9%. But it also shows a lot of people don't know what's going on. It's a very close race. There's 27 candidates. So does seeing a poll like that, does that make you more excited or more nervous about, how close things are?
Polls are always snapshots in time. I'm very encouraged by what I hear on the doors, right? And we've knocked on over 40,000 doors in the community, and people I think are excited of not only about my record of delivering results, but also the plan and know the kind of leadership that I would bring to our city. So we'll keep working hard here. I think depending on when this airs, right? We're right now about 28 days from the start of early voting. Ballots are going to get mailed out of here shortly, out from the elections office shortly, right? So we'll keep working hard.
A lot of people I talk to, especially in more, liberal leaning circles, and San Antonio is a liberal leaning city. A lot of people don't want to talk about politics just because they're so upset with what's going on at the federal level, with what's going on at the state level. Are you seeing any of that when you're going door to door? And does that kind of hurt you when you're running a mayoral race, a local race?
I think what we always have to do is explain to voters and have a conversation with voters about what they care about. Everyone that I talk to, I always start it with what's your number one issue? What do you care about, right? As you're thinking about this race, what do you want to make sure the next mayor understands from your viewpoint as you think about voting in this race? So I always start there, right? And from there, we can then have a conversation about what I would work to do to address that. Now, not everything obviously is it within the mayor's purview. But I think from that, we can have a conversation about, okay, your issue is housing affordability. Well, I've got a first 100 days. One of the things I want to work on is how can we go faster on certain kinds of projects to increase the supply of housing in our community that is affordable, right? Those projects that are 70 to 100% affordable, that co-locate childcare, that help us meet our transit-oriented objectives. City staff, how can we go faster on these things? Because that tells people, hey, I've heard you, right? We're trying to work on these things, and not just in a silo, not just housing, not just childcare, not just transit, but like, how can we think about these problems holistically? Because that's how people are living them, right? They're living with the challenge of housing affordability and childcare and public transit all at the same time. So our solutions should try to be as holistic as they can be. I think to your point, I think in our community, we really, appreciate uniquely some of the national security challenges, right? Just because we're military city USA, right? 16% of our community is either a veteran or is active duty. And so, this morning, as we're hearing more and more about the security breach, as people are unfortunately communicating in ways that at the end of the day put people's lives at risk, right? If any of that information was picked up, and you can bet it probably was, to be frank. I think our folks understand, the challenges with all of that, right? Being careless with that information, putting people's lives at risk, and then, oh, by the way, lying about it, which is what they're doing now. I think, again, I know when I learned the Air Force core values, integrity first, service before self, excellence in all we do, those just kind of stay with you. So I think it's, as we are dealing with that, I think also, look, I get my own care from the VA, right? And as we're hearing about and experiencing real cuts to those services in our community, that is also coming up in some of the conversations that I'm having with voters. And so when I say, when I talk to people and they raise issues like that are at the federal level, I think I share with them what I would do to help address that, right? So here are the things here are the challenges that you've identified that we can try to tackle at the city level. On the other pieces, though, right? I think it's really important that the mayor is a vocal advocate for the city in all ways, right? Hey, federal level, this is how your cuts to the VA. This is what it looks like in our community. This is what it means, right? Cuts to the Department of Education. Every school that I went to, Matt, is a Title I school. Adams Hill Elementary School, Pease Middle School, John Jay High School, right? And so cuts to the Department of Education, and cuts in particular, right, that impact those already vulnerable schools, that is not good for our long-term economic strength. On top of, yes, the likely, hole that's going to be left in the city budget if we don't get those federal funds that we were counting on. So I think there's a way in which we can help voters understand that, look, elections matter, they matter. And frankly, every day is showing us that things could get better. So what we need to do is we need to take care of home base, and we need to make sure we've got a strong mayor that's going to focus on results. And I will
And
be that person.
absolutely. And when you're talking to voters in a mayoral race, some of the issues are going to be smaller, more localized, as opposed to when you're the undersecretary of the Air Force or when you're running for Congress, you might be talking about the big, meaty issue of the day. But at the local race, you on any given day, you might be talking about horse carriages downtown or zoning or something that might seem small, but to somebody is the biggest issue in the world. So, how do you get down to that level and talk to voters where they are about some of these issues that might be extremely local?
Well, I think that's, I mean, I think to me that's the beauty of it, right? I mean, is you can go, and even frankly, as the undersecretary, you go sometimes from very strategic to something that you think is a small issue, but is actually, when you address it, a symptom of a bigger issue, right? So, for example, um, one of the things I was most proud of actually is helping a woman. Her name is Kate Ranta. She was a domestic violence and gun violence survivor, and I caught wind of her story, and it really kind of hit hard for me because, unfortunately, domestic violence is a significant issue in the military. You don't hear as much about it as you do other issues like sexual assault, sexual harassment, but domestic violence is a number two. And I heard about her story, and in the context of hearing her story, it identified some systemic challenges that we needed to address, right? So, for example, 10 years, this happened to her 10 years ago, and the people that were helping her at the time, um, she did not help her get this assistance, right? It was a financial assistance and a healthcare assistance for her and her kid. And so I heard that she didn't get it. And I thought, well, it's never too late to do the right thing. Let's make sure we get this person that it's called transitional compensation assistance. Because I'm like, look, if this assistance is there to help you transition to frankly a better life. Or to bridge that, and she never got it. So I was like, well, I'm not going to assume that you have transitioned as best you could economically if we didn't try to help you. So I worked hard to get her that. And, it was interesting because while it was a decade later, it still meant the world to her, right? And it still meant the world to her and her kid to now have this healthcare. And what it did, though, was show that we could make some changes in general how we approach this. So instead of because I asked her, I was like, hey, did you get this? She said, no, I didn't even know it existed. So as a leader, though, when you have the opportunity to say, okay, we can do this better, if our focus is on making somebody whole, right, as whole as possible, and helping people, and making sure that they understand what the resources are, then we can change kind of how the system sees this and approaches it, right? So now the policy is, if this is happening to somebody, those helping them say, hey, unless you tell me you don't want this, you're going to get this, versus somebody saying, oh, can I have that? Can you help? Can I apply for that thing? Right? That's a different way of trying to help people, versus trying to somebody helping going through a checklist. I say all that because that was one example of an issue that was applicable to one person, but it was an indicative of how we needed to better approach this issue that was so contrary to, good order and discipline in the military. And I would argue there are lots of challenges like that. I just had a small business roundtable with some small business owners that talked about a lot of the red tape that is a challenge for them just to be able to keep their business going, right? It's like simple things, Matt. Like, it's hard to find information on the website. Like, why aren't these things, like, why isn't this an easy process to follow? But again, if you are really, and I think this is what leaders need to do, is put yourself in the shoes of people that are trying to use the thing that you said is there to help them. And if it doesn't help them, well, then maybe you need to fix that. And so I think that is, that's just fundamental leadership, regardless of what level you're serving at. And I look forward to bringing, again, my strategic experience managing a $173 billion budget, leading 600 people, with just kind of a basic common sense of, does the thing do the thing that we said it would do, right? Because at the end of the day, we're here to serve people and help people.
I want to move away from the election itself a little bit and talk a little bit about policy. The one thing I hear the most about, maybe not from, average San Antonians walking around the city, but the thing I hear the most on the news is about Project Marvel, the idea that the Spurs would move to a new arena downtown and leave the Frost Bank Center on the east side. Any thoughts on that? Support, oppose? Just thoughts in your first 100 days where you'd be leaning towards on that?
Well, I don't think we have nearly enough data on this project. Who's paying for what? I mean, that's where we are now, right? Just read in the newspaper today that they're still, still determining who is going to pay for what. Ultimately, I think what we really need to see is how this is ultimately going to benefit the city. right? Yes, who's going to pay for what, but who is also going to benefit? How are we going to benefit? Because Matt, when I talk to and I talk to voters and I go to neighborhood association meetings, you're right, this comes up because people have Google. People can look at traditionally how these deals have gone down. They remember, many of them remember when Henry Cisneros said, "Hey, let's publicly finance the Alamo Dome, and that'll make us competitive for a football team." The Brahmas are cool. That is not an NFL football team, right? AT&T Center, Nelson Wolf just shared, right? The deal that he negotiated was that the Spurs would give 20% of their profits every year. He's like, ask me how much we got over 20 years. Zero, right? On top of the fact that, if you go to the AT&T Center, you're still looking at Coca-Cola distribution trucks, right? Across across the way. So on top of, I was just at that town hall that Tommy Calvert had a couple of weeks ago at this point, where those residents are rightly pissed off, I think would be the scientific term, about the lack of investment in their community, right? That's how that was sold to them. But you don't see, they don't see it, they don't feel it, and because it didn't come, it didn't exist, right? It doesn't exist. So I think folks are rightly asking, where are the numbers? We haven't seen any numbers. And how are we going to make sure, if this does go through, that we get a good deal this time? So that's where I am. I am concerned, and I have put this on my website about how we even got to where we are, though, right? And it was the San Antonio Express News that first broke this, that this potential multi-billion-dollar deal has been going on for over a year as city staff is negotiating these things under non-disclosure agreements, right? Look, I worked in the intelligence community. I know that there is a way in which you protect information, but at the right time, you've got to make sure decision makers have access to that information. And I would argue a potential multi-billion-dollar deal needs much more public oversight and input than we have now. I mean, you had some city council folks saying currently elected folks, right? The people elected by the voters to be their voice that are reading about Project Marvel at the same time that average folks are, right? I mean, I don't think that is the right way to do things, and I think we can do better. Which is why first 100 days, I want to, hey, show me that NDA policy, right? Let's make sure that we've got a policy that helps us do city business, but also make sure that people that need the information, voters and taxpayers, have it when it's appropriate. So I think we still need a lot more data, a lot more of the numbers to understand and make sure we get a good deal.
So it sounds like at a minimum, a Mayor Ortiz Jones would want to at least add some transparency to this process.
At a minimum.
Okay. Let's go from pro basketball to college basketball because we have the Final Four coming up in 2 weeks. I think it's so exciting. I think the 2018 Final Four was one of the most fun times I've ever had in downtown San Antonio. It's just so exciting seeing all the different teams' colors on the Riverwalk just blended in for as long as you can see. I think we're the best city to host events like this. It's an incredible atmosphere. So how do we keep San Antonio competitive to keep getting events like this? Because of course, tourism and hospitality means so much more to us to where, if a Houston or Dallas lost an event like this, it might not hurt their bottom line, like if we weren't getting the kind of events like this. So how do we stay competitive to keep getting Final Fours, All-Star games, and the like?
I think, well, and I talked to some of the folks that have engaged with the NCAA team. Part of it is we got to finish this doggone construction, right? I mean, the complaint is that some of the construction that is happening downtown looks very similar to what was happening last time they were here, and that's just not a
Yeah.
good look, right? That's not a good look. So we got to get that. I think, this is about basic accountability. And these projects that have gone on for a long time, not only do they hurt to your point, hurt our ability to be competitive for future NCAA tournaments, but they hurt small businesses downtown. Right. That is literally the number one complaint that they have shared with me. They're like, I don't need a plan to save me. Just finish the construction. So folks and so consumers, shoppers can come to my business. Right. And so that would be for me kind of top priority. Those projects that are long overdue, like what's the plan? Right. How are we? And this is, really for public works. And oh, by the way, we're not going to dig something up 3 different times. Right. Like, let's make sure that when we go in there, we've got all stakeholders that are impacted by it, so we're not having to continually redig these things up. So I think that's important. I think certainly transparency around when something starts and when it's going to finish, so people can plan. Because at the end of the day, this hurts people's bottom line. I also let me just say this.
Mhm.
When I think about the NCAA, though, I think it's great that we bring in a bunch of tourists for that. I want to make sure that we are, as we think about our economic growth in our community, how can we also ensure that we've got, more people in San Antonio that can afford a ticket, right? That they're not only going to the free stuff, right? Some of our folks want to go to those games too. So we've got to make sure, I think, we think about our economic trajectory, good paying jobs in our community. That should also be a goal.
Yeah, I think that's super important to making sure locals are enjoying these events as well. As I start to wrap this up, I couldn't help but notice your campaign office is in Monte Vista, just a few blocks from my house. Any particular connection to this area, or is there any area of San Antonio that you feel particularly connected to?
I grew up on the far west side. Proud product, 78245, Duck Pond, for the folks that are familiar. Like that's my stomping grounds, right? Exit 7. Uh, that's my community. My church is on the far east side though, Santo Niño Catholic Church, first and only Filipino Catholic church in North America. But Monte Vista is a great kind of central location for we're on a main kind of, well, obviously you've got the strip right down the street, you've got the Pearl. It's pretty close to the highways, so it's a good community to be in.
Absolutely, and I'll close with this one because when you first came on my radar was your 2018 race against Will Hurd, and in that race, you came so close to winning that I think at one point it was like 100% reported, and it was showing you as having the most votes. I feel like that would just be like such a heartbreaking defeat when you came so close. So how do you motivate yourself to, get back in the game and run for something after, having come so close to in electoral politics before, then trying it again.
I think at the end of the day, when you run for office and when you put yourself out there like this, you've got to be very clear about why you're doing it, because there are some hits, as you just mentioned, right? There's some highs, there's some lows, but at the end of the day, this is about making sure my community is well led. Right. Again, I'm just very cognizant of the ways in which my story would only be possible in the United States of America. And frankly, I'm very thankful for the ways in which my community invested in me and allowed my story to be possible. So I feel a very strong sense of responsibility to make sure those other folks in 78245, but frankly, any zip code in our community has the opportunity to live their best possible life, right? And I hope our community produces, continues to produce great leaders. But I think that's an incumbent on those of us that have the leadership, have the skill set to really push for that. So I would look forward to doing that as the next mayor of San Antonio.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, that's Gina Ortiz Jones, the former Undersecretary of the Air Force and the current leading candidate for mayor of San Antonio. Gina, thank you so much for joining the program.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.